Fantasy football season's finally here, and here's quarterback start sits every matchup of week 1. So the first matchup, Detroit Lions, Thursday Night Football at the Kansas City Chiefs. So Jared Goff, he was solid last season with the Detroit Lions. Obviously, they got good weapons in Amon St. Brown. You got Jahmyr Gibbs, who I think is going to have a great rookie season. You got Laporta at tight end, but this week here, going into week 1, it's a tough matchup, obviously, at the defending champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. And Goff going into the year, he was outside the top 15 a little bit at quarterback. So right now, obviously every team playing this week, it's hard to start Goff in 12, 14 team leagues. And I'm going to give him a sit this week, even though, like I said, this is a ball game they could be trailing early and often. They're going to have to throw a lot. But I still think Jared Goff isn't going to put up great numbers to be a starter this week. Patrick Mahomes, obviously, first quarterback off the board in most fantasy leagues, and he's obviously starting the best quarterback possibly in fantasy football. It doesn't matter his weapons, and this week here versus a mediocre Lion defense, I think he has a monster ball game, and he's a must start. Now to the Cincinnati Bengals at the Cleveland Browns. Joe Burrow, he's been banged up all training camp with the calf injury, but reports are coming out he's going to be ready to go as Joe Burrow, but I don't think he's going to be 100% is Burrow, but still, he's a great pocket quarterback. He's got great weapons in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon still could get the job done out of the backfield. And this week here versus a middle-of-the-pack Cleveland Brown defense that obviously he knows well, even though he's had a bad history versus them in the first few seasons of his career. I still think Burrow goes out there and puts in a good performance, and he was a top 6, 7 quarterback drafted in fantasy league, so he gets a start this week. Now to Deshaun Watson. Last season, he didn't look good at all after returning from the 11-game suspension. But this week, it's a decent matchup, and it's a ball game where they could be trailing early and often here as this Brown team, where they're going to rely on Watson. So now with a full training camp, obviously, and no off-the-field issues now, where he could just focus on football. I think Watson has a bounce back here, but right now, here in week 1, he's a borderline play here for Watson. Going into the year, he was about the 10th, 11th quarterback drafted in most fantasy leagues. But right now, this week here, like I said, I could see a lot of Nick Chubb in this ball game. And Watson, we just don't know what we're going to get from him 100%. After last season was a down 5-6 ball games for him. So he's borderline for me. Now to the Texans at the Ravens. This one obviously pretty straightforward. CJ Stroud is a sit for me. This Texan team definitely got some veterans around Stroud and stuff. But in his first career start in a hostile environment, obviously Baltimore, that's one of the better teams in the league here. He's not a guy, obviously Stroud, that I'm going to have confidence in. And he was undrafted in a lot of fantasy leagues, besides maybe the deepest of leagues and dynasty leagues, obviously. But he's a sit this week. And Lamar Jackson, he got his big contract. And now no more excuses. They got weapons around them. Drafted Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, they signed, obviously. Nelson Aguilar, they brought to the mix. Mark Andrews has been there. So right now, Lamar, he was usually the 4th or 5th quarterback off the board. And he's a start here versus a pretty bad Texan defense. Now to the Bucs at the Minnesota Vikings. Baker Mayfield, he won the starting job, but it doesn't mean I'm going to run him out there in fantasy leagues here. We got to see a lot from Baker for him just to be rostered in most fantasy leagues. So he's a sit, even though he's got good weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Now to Kirk Cousins, good matchup on paper. He's awesome at home. Obviously, he's Kirk Cousins throughout his career. And this week here versus Tampa Bay defense, I think he could get the job done. And when you got a Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and now a new weapon in Jordan Addison, who I think could be pretty decent for this Viking team, it's a recipe for success. And I got Cousins as a start this week. Carolina Panthers at the Atlanta Falcons. So Bryce Young, he makes his debut in this ball game. And to be honest, I just don't like any of these quarterbacks in this game. So Bryce Young, he's a sit for me. Not a lot of weapons on this Carolina team. I know they signed Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen in the offseason, but DJ Chark's banged up. And Adam Thielen, I think his best seasons are behind him, even though it wouldn't be surprising to me if he has a decent bounce back here. But right now, if you got Bryce Young on your roster, that's pretty tough sledding, obviously. If you're in a normal 12, 14-team league at deepest. But this week, I don't see him doing much, even though I know this Falcon defense ain't all that great, but he's a sit. And Desmond Ritter's a sit as well, even though this team definitely has good weapons in Atlanta. Bijan Robinson, you drafted Kyle Pitts. We're waiting for the breakout with him. Drake London. But this week here, I think it's going to be a lot of running for this Falcon team, where Ritter, the ball's not going to be in his hands enough for him to go out there and put up big numbers. And if you're running into the season in a basic league with Ritter as well, he's not a guy I could trust. Obviously, now to the Cardinals at the Washington Commanders. this one too. Joshua Dobbs, he's going to be the starter. Colt McCoy cut in the preseason finale, and Joshua Dobbs, not a lot of starting under his belt. And this Washington Commander defense is a pretty decent defense. So right now, Joshua Dobbs, he's an easy sit. He's not even a fantasy factor at all. Obviously, Dobbs, he's only rostered in 3% of fantasy leagues. So right now, he obviously has some running ability as Joshua Dobbs, but he's not a player on the radar. Sam Howell, he's going to be the starter this season for Washington, but I have no confidence in him as well, even though we know Arizona is possibly the worst team in the NFL they could be this season. Got decent weapons in Terry McLaurin, obviously, if he's going to play in this game. You got Robinson and Antonio Gibson in the backfield and Jahan Dotson, but even in a plus matchup, I'm not going to have that much confidence in Howell, and he's a sit this week. Now to the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Indianapolis Colts. Trevor Lawerence, what a breakout season it was for him last season, and he was a top 7, top 8 quarterback drafted in fantasy leagues going into the season. And this week here, he's got another good matchup to start off the season at the Indianapolis Colts. It's an indoor game, and now you got even more weapons to add. To get Calvin Ridley to this offense, to go with Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne, and Zay Jones. It's sky the limit here, in my opinion, here for Trevor Lawerence. And I think he could pick apart this Colt defense and has a top 5, top 6 play this week at the quarterback position. Now Anthony Richardson, a lot of great reports coming out of training camp for him. He's got the monster arm, and he's got the great running ability, where it wouldn't be surprising to me if Richardson could rush anywhere from 500 to 800 yards this season. And this week in a ball game versus a division opponent, in the opener, home opener as well, obviously, I think Richardson could go out there and with his running ability alone could put up some decent fantasy points. So right now, coming into the year, I had him about top 10 quarterback is Richardson. I think this week he could put in a decent ball game. Now to the 49ers at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Brock Purdy, he's a sit for me. This Steeler defense is pretty solid. I know you got great weapons, Deebo, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and McCaffrey back there. But right now, Purdy, I got to see a little bit more out of him. And we don't know if that elbow's 100% after last season. He got knocked out in the NFC Championship game. So this week, he's a sit for me. And Kenny Pickett, I think he has a big year this year for the most part. But here in week 1, he's a sit versus one of the best defenses in the NFL here. Even though we know Nick Bosa most likely won't get a contract extension in time. And even if he does, he's not going to be ready to play much in week 1. But anyway, Kenny Pickett got decent weapons on the offense. But this is tough for a second-year quarterback to verse a great defense like San Francisco. Now to the Tennessee Titans and the New Orleans Saints. So right now, Tannehill, you got DeAndre Hopkins in the offseason. You got Traylon Burks. You got Kwangu. So you got a decent offense over there in Tennessee. But I just don't trust Tannehill as a week-in and week-out starter versus a pretty stout defense, especially at home. He's not a quarterback I'm going to run out there for my fantasy team. So he's a sit. And Derek Carr in his New Orleans debut, they got some decent weapons on the offense as well. They got the fast track over there, obviously, but he's another quarterback we saw last season. A lot of inconsistency, and they had a good offense over there in Vegas. So this week, I'm sitting Carr. I'm not saying he can't be an option down the line this season, but we got to take a wait-and-see approach. Now to the Raiders at the Denver Broncos. Jimmy Garoppolo, I got him as a sit this week. Jimmy G, going from San Francisco to Las Vegas. He's been banged up throughout his NFL career. And I know he's got decent weapons in Devontae Adams. You got Josh Jacobs back after the holdout. And obviously Jacoby Myers at the wide receiver position, Renfro. But this week he's a sit here for me, Jimmy G. You're going to Denver, obviously. The altitude over there is always a factor. And he's not 100% as well, Jimmy G, coming into training camp he was. And into this ball game. And like I said, this Bronco defense, they're still a pretty decent defense in my opinion. And they're going to make it a little bit tough here for Garoppolo. And he was never really a fantasy option over the last few seasons anyway. Russell Wilson, we'll see if he can have a bounce back this season this year. With obviously Sean Payton, the coach over there in Denver now. But Russ last season was a horrible year for him. Jerry Jeudy, he's most likely out in this ball game. Javonte Williams, not 100%. And this Raider team, I think they could cause some chaos on Russ in this one. Obviously with Crosby, one of the better pass rushers in the league. And this offensive line, not that great over there in Denver. So with all those factors, and Wilson last season, he was cooked for the most part. He's not a quarterback I have confidence in. And I'm sitting him this week now to the Eagles at the New England Patriots. Jalen Hurts, he was drafted as a top 2, top 3 quarterback in fantasy leagues. He's a must-start each and every week. He's got great weapons. I know it's not the greatest of matchups to go to Gillette Stadium versus New England defense that always brings it, but right here, Jalen Hurts got to the Super Bowl last season, and this year he's going to continue that run once again, I believe. And he's a must-start even in a mid-pack matchup. And now to the Patriots side of things, Mac Jones, we really haven't seen anything out of him over the last season and a half, and now he's got a tough defensive line to deal with here with the Philadelphia Eagles coming to town. And he don't have a lot of weapons on that offense either. Here's Mac Jones. So he's an easy sit for me this week. Now to the Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. Matthew Stafford, it looks like Cooper Kupp is going to be out in this ball game, and there's not much at that wide receiver position after Cooper Kupp. They got Ben Skoranek, got Van Jefferson, got Tyler Higbee, but still, he's not really a guy I'm going to have confidence in throwing out there as Stafford, and we still don't know if he's 100% as well, coming off the injury last season. So right now, Matthew Stafford, he's a sit for me. Now to the Seahawks. Geno Smith last season, it was a great year for him, no doubt about it. Coming out of nowhere, he got the contract extension in the offseason, and now you got DK Metcalf, drafted JSA over there, and you got Tyler Lockett, who's always been a speedy and a reliable receiver. But in this one, I still think this Ram defense can make some problems here for this Seahawk offensive line. And I could see a lot of running here with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. So right now, Geno Smith, I think he has another decent season. Like I said, he's got good weapons. But in this ball game, I got him as a borderline option because this game could get out of hand early. And like I said, the running backs could do damage in this one. Now to the Dolphins at the Los Angeles Chargers. Tua, if he's healthy and 100% coming into the season, he's a quarterback that could put up top 10 numbers this season. When you got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill here as your wide receivers, those guys, a lot of yards after catch, put up a lot of fantasy points. And then in Tua, I have a great rapport. So right now, I got Tua as the start here versus middle of the pack Charger defense. Justin Herbert signed the contract extension in the offseason, and I think we see a big season here from Justin Herbert. So right now, with a lot of good weapons and everyone healthy coming into the season, and this Dolphin defense going into the year without Jalen Ramsey, I think Herbert picks apart this defense, and he's a must-start this week. Now to the Packers at the Bears. Jordan Love, first season as the starter finally. After Aaron Rodgers got traded to the New York Jets, I still can't trust him. Even though the Chicago Bear defense isn't the greatest of defense, it's still tough to go in there week 1 at Soldier Field and play a good ball game. And I know he's got decent weapons in Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, and you also got Aaron Jones out of the backfield and A.J. Dillon. But it's tough to start Jordan Love, even though I think he could have some upside this season here at the quarterback position. But here going into week 1, I have him as a sit. And Justin Fields, I have as a start with his rushing ability and added weapons to the offense this season here. I think he could have a good season once again as Fields. And like I said, last season he rushed over 1,000 yards. And to add DJ Moore to the lineup is a big addition here for Justin Fields. And the offense is built around him, and he can run loose in this one. So he's a start this week, and he was a top 5 quarterback drafted in most fantasy leagues. Now to the Dallas Cowboys at the Giants on Sunday Night Football. Dak Prescott, I have him as a start. I'm not the biggest of Dak guys for fantasy football, but here going into week 1, he's had a great career, winning the last 10 ball games versus the New York Giants. And I think this season here, this offense is going to be a little more friendly here for Dak Prescott with McCarthy making the calls. Dak last season was a bad year for him in terms of interceptions, leading the league, and he did miss 5 ball games last season. But like I said, he's got the Giants number for some reason throughout his career. Now to add Brandon Cooks to this lineup is a big addition. So I got him as a start this week, and Daniel Jones I have a start as well. Daniel Jones, he could bring running to the game as well. And now to add Darren Waller and Jalen Hyatt this season in the offseason, and Paris Campbell. Those are good additions to this Giant offense. I know the Cowboy defense improved, adding Stephen Gilmore in a trade in the offseason. And then when you got a Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence on the defensive line as well as good additions, and Diggs in the secondary. But right now, I think Jones, with his running ability and with some adding weapons, can have a decent fantasy game where he could score 18, 20 fantasy points. And I have him as a starter just out of the top 12. And then the final game of the week, the Buffalo Bills at the New York Jets. A lot of hype here with the New York Jets going into the season. This is obviously a big division game and a huge Monday night game that's going to get a lot of ratings, obviously. And it's going to be a good game, no doubt about it. But Josh Allen and this Bill team here, they feel a little bit disrespected, I believe, coming into the season, where all the hype is with the New York Jets, where the Bills have dominated in the regular season over the last few seasons. And Josh Allen, obviously, he was a top 2, top 3 quarterback, taking the most fantasy leagues, and he's matchup proof in my opinion. So you go out there and you start him. And for Aaron Rodgers, last season he was pretty bad for fantasy football, but now people think he's rejuvenated and ready to go. And I'll give him the benefit of the doubt here in week 1 with the bright lights, all eyes on this ball game, obviously, and him working with better weapons than he did last season with a Garrett Wilson, obviously, on this team. BRYCE Hall, Dalvin Cook in the backfield. Conklin at tight end, he can make a few plays here and there. And also his old buddy Alan Lazard coming, and Randall Cobb to the New York Jets in the offseason. But anyway, I'll give him the start this week, but it wouldn't be surprising me if Rodgers has a bad game versus one of the better defenses in the league. Backs I would start as sit every matchup of week 1 of the fantasy football season.